Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Melinda Nusofora. In the latest sign of warming ties between the US and Türkiye, the two NATO allies have held their largest joint military exercise in 7 years. Leading the drills were the country's two largest naval vessels, the USS Gerald R and Türkiye's TCG Anadoulu. The exercise comes as Washington and Ankara continue to see improvements in their diplomatic relationship this year, following a tense start to Joe Biden's presidency. That positive turn was on full display back in June during President Erdogan's meeting with his US counterpart on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Lithuania. Erdogan's decision to back Sweden's bid to join NATO came as welcome news to the Americans. The US administration also reiterated its support for the sale of F-16 fighter jets to Türkiye. The two leaders are also expected to cross paths at the G20 summit later this month in New Delhi. Signs that the two allies could be seeing a wider rapprochement came after a rare visit by a US congressional team to Syria's pro-Turkish regions in the north. The decade-plus war in Syria has been a long-running sticking point between Ankara and Washington. And now to discuss the latest developments in the Türkiye-US relationship. Joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Sean Michael Cox. He's a senior advisor at Global Policy Institute. And from Istanbul, Mehmet Çelik. He is an editorial coordinator at Daily Sabah. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for your time here on Straight Talk. Mehmet, let's start with you. Compared to previous years, how would you describe Türkiye's current relationship with the US?
Well, compared to previous recent past of the US-Türkiye relationship, I think there is a hopeful environment for better ties at the moment. Türkiye and US relations have been, they've had ups and downs, but if you look at back in history, you can see that there is always an existing and working relationship in some areas, although in others, there's always conflicting relations. And in the recent past, we've seen that, with the U.S. support to the YPG in northern Syria, which is no different than the PKK terrorist organization, the fact that FETÖ leader is still in the United States and many of its members are living in the United States, and U.S. indifference to this. If we look at the F-16 issue and many other regional issues, Türkiye and U.S. have had, a very conflicting relationship in the recent past. However, following the Vilnius summit and, the U.S. President Biden and meeting with President Erdogan, I think we see that rebuilding of trust phase at the moment. We can't say that now the U.S.-Türkiye relations it's a one done deal now and everything is all rosy at the moment, but I think there's that exploration to rebuild trust, and on that trust rebuilding, a new phase of this relationship that has been going for decades could turn into something that is more strategic. And now this is the time, I think, for that. When you look at Ankara from Washington, because of Türkiye's position, particularly between Russia and the Ukraine, and other conflicts in the region, and Türkiye's very proactive foreign policy in the recent years has made Türkiye a very key actor in the regional development. So Washington seeing this, and of course it is also in interest of Türkiye to reestablish that relationship with the US as well. So it's a win-win relationship where the two sides are exploring to rebuild ties at the moment.
Sean, what do you make of it? I was in the room when we saw President Erdogan and President Biden come together for their bilateral on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Vilnius. And I have to say it was probably the most relaxed I've seen the two presidents with each other. This is obviously a rebuilding phase. What do you think has been the turning point? How did we get to this current point?
There have been several factors that have led to this as a turning point in Türkiye-US relations. One of them, frankly, was the recent elections in Turkey in May, and the realization that Erdogan isn't going anywhere. President Erdogan is an astute politician who, despite the challenges that Turkey has been facing over the past several years, managed to win historic re-election for the third time. And the U.S. government has come to the realization that he is the main power broker in Turkey, and they need to work with him. So the emphasis that had been on U.S.-Turkey relations in the previous years, one focusing on emphasizing democratic norms, building democracy, the Biden administration has pulled back from insisting on these types of activities and focusing more on mutually beneficial aspects of the relationship, which include defense. There's also the realization in Washington that Türkiye is, a mid-sized power, and it is contending with other countries, particularly in the region, such as Saudi Arabia, to develop their own bilateral relations in a world that is growing more multipolar in nature than unipolar, as it has been for the past 2 decades, with the United States taking the lead. So as Türkiye diversifies its foreign policy, as Türkiye looks to other partners to meet its own interests and its own needs, the United States is intent on carving out areas of the relationship that can be strengthened while essentially ignoring those areas that have not proved fruitful in diplomatic development over the past decade or so.
Mehmet, what do you make of that idea? Türkiye, as Sean just says, has a lot of other strategic partners. It's working to rebuild its relationship with Saudi Arabia. It has a working relationship with Russia. Why does it need the US? Why does it need to be on such good footing?
Well, why do you need the US? I think that's a very, everybody needs the big players, and when they're playing in the big leagues, you need to be partners with you need to have a working relationship with the big players. And this is what Türkiye has been doing when it is actually constructing its relation, when it has continued its relations with Russia as well. So there's that pragmatism in Türkiye's foreign policy when it comes to ensuring that its diplomatic interests or its security interests are at stake. It is able to actually talk to these partners, be it Israel in the Middle East, Egypt, Saudi Arabia. You talked about the normalization in the region. Türkiye has now got nearly finishing this wave of normalization in the region. And, if with Syria, the only missing link at the moment. But of course, if you want to be a global player, you have to have really working relationship. And I'm not saying all good relations with all sides. Türkiye has conflicts with Russia. Türkiye has conflicts with the United States, with Israel or other partners in the region. But it has been, very successful in maintaining some sort of working relationship with Russia, where they can actually have some sort of talks in Syria, or they can have some sort of mediator role when it comes to Ukraine conflict. So I think, looking at Türkiye-US relations and historic relations, there's no better partnership for them to have, but they have to compartmentalize these issues so that they can establish a ground where they can build upon.
So Sean, let me turn it over to you. You mentioned Türkiye's election and the re-election of President Erdogan as being one of the turning points in regards to their relationship. What about the US elections? US presidential elections are due in November 2024. What, if any, implication do you think that is going to have on the current President Joe Biden's machinations and movements with its Turkish counterparts?
Well, machinations is never a term that I really associate with President Biden. He tends to flow more naturally as a politician. But in any case, U.S. elections are going to be more focused on domestic issues. Some of his opponents in the Republican Party, and whoever ends up being the Republican candidate facing President Biden in November of 2024, will of course bring out some aspects of foreign policy or perceived weaknesses in U.S. foreign policy during the Biden administration, but they won't be particularly significant. They're going to be focusing on economic issues at home, domestic issues, culture wars, and the like. The possible areas that rebuilding a relationship with Türkiye could impact Joe Biden's strategy for re-election could be the fact that He has made such a big deal out of promoting democracy around the world. And many politicians in the United States, particularly Republicans and even some Democrats like Bob Menendez in New Jersey, oppose him making any rapprochement with Erdogan and with Turkey, given their perception of their human rights record. So it will be a factor, but a relatively minor factor.
Mehmet, the F-16 issue has been a major diplomatic sticking point for years now. The US administration says it fully supports the sale now, but it still needs to get through Congress. How much of a problem could this be for their relationship if Congress doesn't get behind the sale of the F-16s?
Well, the F-16 issue has indeed been one of the conflicting areas, particularly for, following the S-400 purchase. And some of the lobbies having a huge effect on the Congress. And this will, of course, become a very good point from the Ankara side to use as a card against, Washington, whereas the Congress is being influenced by some of the anti-Türkiye lobbies, particularly the Greek lobby or the Armenian lobby or the FETÖ influence on some of the Congress members. I think it will become a very sensitive issue. However, if it actually passes through the Congress, then I think new levels can be achieved, and that trust building between Türkiye and US will become more fruitful in the coming days. But of course, if this fails, I think it will become a very hard issue between Washington and Ankara. Security is one of the key things for Turkey's defense industry at the moment, and F-16 is a huge part of this.
We always appreciate your analysis here on Straight Talk. Sean Michael Cox and Mehmet Çelik, thank you for joining us.